So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim says, Bab al-wudu mimma ghayyarat an-naru. So he says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, al-wudu, because of food that has been cooked over fire. So, very important concept you have to understand. We see, for example, the form of their head, right? We're like, okay, on this issue, there might be two positions, three positions, etc. At the time of the Sahaba, the further you go back, the more variation there is, right? The further you go back, the more variation there is. So during the time of the Sahaba and Tabi'een, there are certain things that were becoming clear and were not clear. Okay. So for there's certain issues, for example, in the fiqh today, but like, yeah, this is it, and everyone's agreed, very simple. Whereas for them, they're trying to work it out. Originally, the Prophet ﷺ had told them that if they eat cooked food, bread or meat that's cooked with fire, you cook something, you have to make wudu. That was then abrogated, okay? But it wasn't clear to everybody that it was abrogated. So you find here Imam Abu Hanifa making the point and telling us very clearly, oh, by the way, this has been abrogated. You do not have to make wudu if you eat something cooked. Similarly, Imam Malik does the same thing. So Imam Malik doesn't say these are all the causes of wudu. He's interested in things like what is there a debate or what is there unclear. So you see them talking about it. They're talking about it because it's a discussion. You would find somebody at that time in the first or second century saying, "Oh, don't you have to make wudu if you eat something cooked?" And then they're going to turn to them and say no, and they're going to say why, and they're going to explain their reason. And then by the third century, fourth century, everyone's going to say, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's clear now. We now know that." Okay, like we saw the issue of khufs, right? Ibn Umar didn't know about khufs, and then it became clear, right? So this process of clarity, it takes time. So it says, قال محمد الإمام محمد رضي الله عنه قال أخبرنا أبو حنيفة قال حدثنا عمرو بن مرة عن سعيد بن جبير عن ابن عباس, right? So we mentioned last week how the Meccan the Medinans in general, their circle of information, their sources are generally Medini. They're very insular, right? Whereas for for the Kufans, they are not insular. And the Imam Abu Hanifa was familiar with all the positions of everybody. Imam Malik was as well, but Imam Abu Hanifa and they're more cosmopolitan. They're traveling around more. There's more exposure. So here he's quoting from one of the key students of Abdul from the Meccan school. Sa'id ibn Jubair is the Meccan school. So in Mecca there was a kind of their own Hanafi pre-Hanafiism starting, which is their own Meccan school, which is Ibn Abbas and his students, right? Ibn Abbas and his students, like Sa'id ibn Jubair and others, right? And this is the same Sa'id ibn Jubair who said, somebody asked Sa'id ibn Jubair a question. He says, why on earth are you asking me when you have Ibrahim al-Nakhai, right? So that was something else that we were talking about before. So anyway, so this is system. You would find Ibn Abbas and his students, same kind of set of fatwa. And also importantly, you find that there's a kind of a school of tafsir as well. So Ibn Abbas was Tarjuman al-Quran. He was the interpreter of the Quran. So there's a very, very strong school of tafsir around Ibn Abbas and his students. So Sa'id ibn Jubair is one of those people. رضي الله عنه قال لو أتيت بحفنة من خبز أو لحم فأكلت منها حتى أشبع وبعش من لبن إبل فشربت منه حتى أتضلع وأنا على وضوء لا أبالي ألا أمس ماء أتتوضأ من الطيبات. Okay, so basically he's saying that Ibn Abbas said, so Sa'id ibn Jubair is saying if that Abdullah, so there's a mistake here. It says Abdullah ibn Amr, it's not Abdullah ibn Amr, it's Abdullah ibn Abbas, right? So there's a mistake here. So Abdullah ibn Amr is in Egypt, right? It's not, it's a totally different person, right? This is Abdullah ibn Abbas. He said, if I, in the state of wudu, was brought a large bowl of bread and meat, and I ate it till I was satisfied, and a large bowl of camel milk, from which I drank until full, I would not care if I did not touch water. Okay, so he's trying to tell us it doesn't matter. Whatever that was, it's abrogated. Here's a young Sahabi who is familiar with the different Sahaba and Tabi'een, he says, no, it doesn't matter. You do not have to make wudu from any of these things. Okay? That's the point he's making. And then he says something else that's very, very important. Key difference between the Madanis and the Meccans and the Kufans. He says Ibn Abbas, his shakhsiyya, his way of thinking, his personality is very different to the Madanis. The Madanis are very zahiri. They're just very literalists. Like Imam Malik was told, if a dog licks from a bowl, he said, what should you do? You wash it. Okay, so what about if like the dog was wet? Like, isn't it the same thing? It's like, no, it's not the same. Okay, what about the dog's saliva? Not the same. Like, well, so what's the issue then with the dog licking from the bowl? Is it that the dog is wet? Is it that the saliva is like just like that? It's just like that. That's how it is. Um, so you'll find certain things in the Maliki school that's like that. The conservative and usually just sticking in some ways very much like the Zahiris in some ways, meaning just stick to the text as it is and just leave it as it is. That's a very conservative Madani way. Ibn Abbas is not like that. So Ibn Abbas, he says here, should we make wudu from things that are good? Like, where's the logic, right? The logic is purification is from filthy things. These things are not filthy, right? So he says, where's the logic? So this whole idea of thinking about the logic, what is the illah? And what is the system? Trying to superimpose, using the human mind to try and superimpose a system on God's law, that is an approach of Meccans and Kufans, right? And that's why later on we're going to call the Hanafis Ahl Ra'i, right? The people of opinion, the people of introspection and thinking about a system, right? Ibn Abbas, similarly, he spoke about wudu. He said, he was asked about, what was it? Making wudu from consuming something. He said, look, wudu is from what comes out. Breaking a fast is that which comes in. There's a system. So nothing can come into you and break your wudu. That doesn't make any sense. So Ibn Abbas, that's how he thinks. He has a certain mind. He has a certain shakhsiyya, personality. That's how he sees the Sharia as systems. People like Abdullah ibn Umar, very different. Very different kind of world. Different kind of way of thinking, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, yes, Jason.
The Hanafis, for example, and it's not just the Hanafis, taking the position of a number of the Sahaba, not majority, but a number of them. They said, look, here is Adil, okay? Adil's daughter marries a really good guy, decent guy, etc., but without the consent of Adil. So they say, what is the point of putting Adil in charge of his daughter? So that she marries somebody appropriate. She just did that. Like she just married somebody appropriate. So whether he knew or didn't know, that's irrelevant. It's not a problem. At the end of the day, if she's old enough to deal with financial issues, if she could sell her house, if she could buy a house, then she can get married, right? And so the issue is, was Adil wronged that, for example, that his daughter married somebody who's like kind of like not an appropriate member of the family? No, she married somebody same kind of line of business as him, same kind of educational, cultural thing. So the upshot is all okay, right? The majority of scholars say no. The consent has to be there from the wali. That's it. So well, what if he wasn't wronged? So it doesn't matter. Just has to have the consent, right? So that's how the Hanafis think, right? Hanafis, there's a lot more superimposing a logic to things, right? And Ibn Abbas is like that, right? And so the Meccan school, had it existed, perhaps it would have been like that. Perhaps we would have seen fatwa that much more like that, right? Whereas in general, you have these two approaches, the more logical side and the more literal side, right? And so the Maliki Shafi approach does ultimately beget and give birth to the Zahiris. The Zahiris are literalists. So that doesn't come out of the Hanafi school, that comes out of the Shafi school, which comes out of the Maliki school. So it's a side of a different way of thinking, right? It's very, very different. And there are many things in the Maliki school that are not like that in reality. But you see this way of thinking, right? The logic, right? Um, so he says, Qala Muhammad, and also we see that the Hanafi school is now being built not just on the Kufan school in reality. So when you say the Kufan school, yes, but it's not just the Kufan school, because this is from the Meccan school. So does Imam Malik draw from the Meccans? Yes. Not but not that much at all. Does Imam Abu Hanifa draw from the Meccans and the Medinans and the Kufans and the Basrans? And yes. So the gene pool, the Hanafi school has a gene pool and it is Kufan, but the gene pool is actually broader than that, right? And again, because it's a cosmopolitan place, right? Much more travel. You're going to see people. You're going to see more people are going to go there, more discussions are going to come, more objections are going to be raised, right? You know, I just give an example. You know, imagine if we have this whole issue about gender, and I don't know how if it's been solved yet or hasn't been solved yet, right? But let's say, for example, what gender you are you? In Georgia, that's not an issue, right? The objectivity of gender is known because everybody believes that gender is objective. Objective. That's how it is. Simple as that. Nobody cares, right? There's gonna be one or two people, but no, it's not a movement, right? Just that's it. That's how God made you. You're a male. End of story, right? Now I go to California, and then it's like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in that. Gender is a social construct. And then, oh, backlash. This person, for example, had, financial issues because of gender reassignment, had medical issues, right? Like imagine you go to the doctor, you go straight to ER. You need to tell them your actual gender, right? Because it could be dangerous, right? So then you're like, oh yeah, yeah, there's your gender and then your actual gender. And it goes back and forward, and eventually, maybe bit by bit, they'll come to a philosophical concept of what do we mean by gender, and they'll say, look, it is true that gender is absolute and sexual uh, activity is up to you. You want whatever you want to do with your own body in the Western paradigm is up to you, but gender is absolute. So can you understand? So a Georgian, how did they reach that level? By just not getting involved in discussion, right? Whereas in California, a discussion goes round for a century and then they come to a conclusion. Does that make sense? So that's a bit like Kufa versus Medina, right? And so Kufa, there's just like a lot more voices. There's this people saying that people saying this, a lot more discussions, problems, people objecting to things, and then suddenly like, oh, what about this answer? That so that things are happening, right? And what's going to happen then is ultimately the Hanafi school is going to grow, and eventually it will have a knock-on effect on all other madahib. So if the Hanafi school did not exist, the other madahib will not exist in reality. Because like if you look at, for example, even like how the Maliki school, like the Shafi school, for example, Imam Shafi'i, Adil's loving this, right? I'm praising Georgia. I'm talking about the Hanafis, right? A minute ago, he's like, "Why are you talking about my daughter getting married
Yes.
without my permission?" Right? I have to. It's like I'm getting like thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, right? Uh, anyway, so what I was saying was, what was I going to say was, um, so there's this movement in, this. So basically, Hanafi school is kind of born. Imam Muhammad documents the Hanafi school, okay, and then Imam Shafi'i. So then Muhammad comes and studies with Imam Malik. So obviously the students of Imam Malik are like, who's this guy? And then he writes a whole rebuttal of the Maliki school. Okay, Imam Shafi'i studies with Imam Malik and Imam Muhammad. So obviously the Hanafi school is very important in the Shafi'i school, right? Super important. Yeah, Imam Ahmad, he was asked, where do you get these subtle fiqh points? He says, oh, from the books of Imam Abu Yusuf. Oh, sorry, the books of Imam Muhammad. So it's very important. So, and then again, look at this scenario. Somebody comes from North Africa and they're studying with the Hanafis and they're studying with Imam Hanif, the Imam Malik and Imam Malik students. And they want to, there's all these issues that they're dealing with. So they go to various scholars, students of Imam Malik, and say, look, I want to go through all these issues with you, right? And cut long story at the end, that led to this really important book called the Mudawwana. The Mudawwana is this really important book in the Maliki school where Imam Malik is asked questions. Ibn Qasim is asked questions about Imam Malik's fatwa, right? So that is like the most important book in the foundational like texts of the Maliki school. It only exists because people were looking at the Hanafi school and looking at the Maliki school and seeing these differences and asking questions, right? So it's very important, right? It's like bees and flowers. They evolve together. You can't have a bee without flowering plants. No nectar. And then the flowering plants need bees to cross-pollinate, etc. Right? So these things go together. Khair. So then he says, Imam Muhammad says, وهذا قول أبو حنيفة وبه نأخذ لا وضوء مما غيرت النار وإنما الوضوء مما خرج وليس مما دخل. Notice as well here, he is the first person. He says, this is the verdict of Abu Hanifa, we adhere to this. There is no wudu because of fire having changed things by cooking. Wudu is only done because of things that exit the body, not because of things that enter. So notice he has a system, right? So if you think about fiqh originally is like English law, which is what? Based on precedent, right? What do we call it? What English law is called what? We call it like case law. It's called common law, right? So it's called case law, right? This happened, this happened, this happened. You have your hadiths, right? This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Okay, this Sahabi did this Sahabi did this. Okay, we're doing this. So it's based on cases. The Hanafis, they started to make civil law. Civil law is on codes, right? Any contract of this that has this is going to be like this. Oh, you have a system now. They're starting to transfer, right, the unprocessed information, right, into abstract concepts. Does that make sense? That's what happened. That's what happened to Hani. So he's doing that, saying, "Oh, we'll do this from this." And this is in reality a quote from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas did that first, right? But this whole process of starting to shift things, like we have this hadith, you have this ayah. What is the overarching legal principle here, right? This is what we see the Hanafis beginning. Everybody else followed suit, but it's it's there. Okay. Yeah. Okay, where are we now? Okay, so then he says, Imam Muhammad says, أخبرنا أبو حنيفة قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن ابن زاذان عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال دخل علي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بيتي فأتيته بلحم قد شوي فطعم منه فدعا بماء فغسل كفيه ومضمض ثم صلى ولم يحدث وضوءا. Right, so he says, Imam Muhammad says, Imam Abu Hanifa said that Abdurrahman ibn Zadhan narrated to us that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, the Prophet ﷺ entered my house and I brought some meat which had been roasted and he tasted of it. Then he called for water, washed his hands and rinsed his mouth and later prayed without renewing wudu. Right, so you do not have to make wudu from eating something cooked. قال محمد أخبرنا أبو حنيفة قال حدثنا شيبة بن مساور قال كنت قاعدا عند عدي بن أرطاه إذ سأل الحسن البصري. Right, this is al-Hasan al-Basri. So notice again, you don't find Hasan al-Basri in the Muwatta. Hasan al-Basri doesn't come up in the Muwatta, but he comes up here in Kitab al-Athar. So it tells us the Kufans are talking to the Basrans. Right, it's not just one. What does Hasan al-Basri say? So he says, فنتوضأ مما مست النار قال نعم فقال بكر بن عبد الله المزني دخل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على عمته صفية بنت عبد المطلب فنتفت له من كتف باردة فطعم منها ولم يحدث وضوءا. So here, notice again, as you mentioned, it took time for people to work that out. So Hassan al-Basri is saying, yeah, you have to make wudu from things that are cooked. So Imam Muhammad says, Abu Hanifa informed us saying, Shayba ibn Musawir narrated to us saying, I was seated with Adi ibn Artah when he asked Al-Hasan al-Basri, should we make wudu because of that which fire has been touched? So he's only asking the question because other people are talking about it, right? So at this time, here's Hassan al-Basri in the first, second century. There's a debate. A generation next generation, basically no debate, right? So this is a concept we mentioned that the further you go back, the more debate there is. Right? He asked Bakr ibn Abdullah al-Muzani. It says Muzni, but it's Muzani. So the Arabic has Muzni. It's not Muzni. Muzani with a fatha. So, okay. The Prophet ﷺ went to see his aunt Sophia bint Abdul Muttalib, and she picked out some cold shoulder meat for him, which he ate and did not renew wudu. And he says, قال محمد وبقول بكر بن عبد الله المزني نأخذ وهو قول أبي حنيفة. Right? And again, muzni, it is muzani. Then he says, Muhammad says, أخبرنا أبو حنيفة قال حدثنا يحيى بن عبد الله عن أبي ماجد الحنفي. Oh, he was Hanafi. No, Hanafi is a tribe, right? You know, when you say, so when Hussein Ali's wives was from the tribe of Hanifa. So his son was called Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, right? Muhammad, the son of the woman from the tribe of Hanifa, right? That's a tribe. عن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال بينما نحن في المسجد قعودا مع ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه. One second. There we go, a bit clearer now. إذ أقبلوا بحفنة وقلة من ماء من باب الفيل نحوها فقال ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه إني أراكم ترادون بهذه فقال رجل من القوم أجل يا عبد الرحمن يا أبا عبد الرحمن مأدبة كانت في الحي فوضعت منها وشرب منها ثم صب على يديه فغسلهما ومسح وجهه وذراعيه ببلل يده ثم قال هذا وضوء من لا يحدث. So he says, um, So he said, Muhammad said, Abu Hanifa informed us saying that Yahya ibn Abdullah narrated to us that Abu Majid al-Hanafi said about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, once while we were seated in the mosque with Abdullah Mas'ud, there came towards us a bowl and a jug of water from the door of the elephant. I don't know what that is. Ibn Mas'ud said, I think you are going around with this food. I think you're interested in this food, right? Uh, you're being tempted by this food, I believe. Ibn Mas'ud said, one of the men said, yes, Abu Abdurrahman, there was a banquet in the neighborhood. So it was put down, and we ate some of it and drank some of the water. Then he poured some over his hands and washed them, wiped his face and arms with damp hands, and said, this is the wudu for someone who has not nullified his wudu, i.e., eating meat or eating these things do not break wudu. قال محمد وهو قول أبي حنيفة وبه نأخذ لا بأس بالوضوء في المسجد إذا كان من غير قدر. So then he's mentioning another point. He says, this is the verdict of Abu Hanifa to which we adhere. So number one, you don't have to make wudu from something eaten. And number two, making wudu in the mosque is fine as long as you don't make it filthy. Okay, so then he says, باب ما ينقض الوضوء من القبلة والقلس. He says, what of kissing, okay, and breaking wudu from kissing and from vomiting. قال محمد أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد بن أبي سليمان عن إبراهيم النخعي قال إذا قالست ملء فيك فأعد وضوءك وإذا كان أقل من ملء فيك فلا تعد وضوءك. Not sure why it's written وضوءك. It shouldn't be written on a yeah like that. I'm not sure why why is it written on a yeah? Because it's wudu'aka. It's not wudu'ika. Anyhow, Muhammad said, Abu Hanifa informed us from Hamad from Ibn. So this is a classic. This is the Hanafi real gene system, right? This is where the Hanafis really come from. Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman from Ibrahim al-Nakhai. He said, if you retch so much, if you throw up as to fill your mouth, then repeat your wudu. But if it is less than what fills your mouth, do not repeat wudu, right? And this is straight the Hanafi school, right? So when we study Hanafi fiqh, they're going to tell us this, and it's not Imam Abu Hanifa speaking, nor is it his teacher, but rather it's Ibrahim al-Nakhai, one of the greatest muftis of the Tabi'i. So, you know, totally valid thing to follow. And this is also Ibn Hibban of the Shafis also adopted this position that if you vomit, you have to make wudu. قال محمد هذا قول أبي حنيفة رحمه الله وبه نأخذ. Imam Muhammad said, this is the verdict of Imam Hanifa, and we adhere to this. And then Imam Muhammad said, أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم في الرجل يقدم من سفر فتقبله خالته أو عمته أو امرأة ممن يحرم عليه نكاحها قال لا يجب عليه الوضوء إذا قبل من يحرم عليه نكاحها ولكن إذا قبل من يحل له نكاحها وجب عليه الوضوء وهو بمنزلة الحدث. So Imam Muhammad said, Imam Abu Hanifa said that Hamad said that Ibrahim said concerning a man who returns from a journey, for example, and his maternal aunt, maternal or paternal aunt, or someone whom it would be forbidden for him to marry, kisses him. Right? So the context then is just kissing itself, not in a sexual way, right? He is not obliged to do wudu if someone whom he is forbidden to marry kisses him. But if someone who is for whom it is permissible for him to marry kisses him, then he's obliged to make wudu. If it is the same, and it is the same status as other matters of wudu. So notice here, right? We've we've simplified things. We said, look, the Hanafi school is just a summary of the Kufans. Here, Ibrahim al-Nakhai is saying something that backs up which madhab? Go ahead, Dion.
دي الشافعي مذهب.
The Shafi. So the Shafis are going to say, there we go. This is what Ibrahim al-Nakhai said. So this is exactly the Shafi school, right? If you touch, you kiss, you hug your mom, your daughter, your sister, your aunt, your niece, doesn't break wudu. If you touch any female, sexually or non-sexually, any female whom you could marry in principle, right? And that's basically what he's saying, then it breaks your wudu, right? So notice again, Imam Shafi'i is not doing the following. Imam Shafi'i is not picking up the Quran and looking at the hadith and saying, there we go. There's a whole context in his head. Okay, there's all this information from the Sahaba and Tabi'een. And from that, through the eyes of the Sahaba and Tabi'een, he's looking at the Quran and Sunnah. That's what he's doing. And that's why Imam Shafi'i is saying, that reason Imam Shafi'i is not saying. So we might say, why did the Shafi'i say that? Oh, this verse. That's a summary of what we're doing. But in reality, Imam Shafi'i is not just looking at the verse, he's looking through these things. Okay? So he says, قال محمد هذا قول قال محمد وهذا قول إبراهيم ولسنا نأخذ بهذا ولا نرى في القبلة وضوءا على حال إلا أن يمذي فيجب عليه للمذي الوضوء وهو قول أبي حنيفة رحمه الله. Right, so then he says, Imam Muhammad says, we do not adhere to Ibrahim al-Nakhai. So I said, I thought you just said last week and the week before that the Hanafi school is basically Abdullah Mas'ud and Ibrahim al-Nakhai. So yeah, it is basically, but it's not actually. So at the end of the day, is Ibrahim al-Nakhai a mujtahid? Yes. Is Hamad a mujtahid? Yes. Is Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad, are they mujtahid? Yes. So they can't do pure taqleed, right? There's heavy influence is one thing, but then there's pure taqleed. So the same thing you're going to find. The Shafi school is very similar to the Malik school in many things, but it's not on many issues. So here, Imam Muhammad, we will find Imam Muhammad will go against Imam Abu Hanifa on a few issues here and there. And Imam Abu Hanifa is also going against his grand Sheikh Ibrahim al-Nakhai, right, for other reasons. So it says, this is the verdict of Ibrahim. We do not adhere to this, and we do not think the wudu must be is done for kissing in any case, except for when somebody emits pre-ejaculate fluid. So even if it was a sexual kiss, kissing in a sexual way, does not break wudu unless it results in pre-ejaculate coming out, in which case, so if pre-ejaculate comes out, then the person has to make wudu anyway. Okay, so notice that, right? And this again, you're going to find in the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, you're going to find him quoting Sayyidina Ali, quoting Ibn Abbas. So Ibn Abbas says, I couldn't care less, kiss a woman or smell a flower, it's all the same, right? It doesn't matter. Right? Okay, Bab al-wudu min mass al-dhakar. Performing wudu of how touching the male private parts. قال محمد أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه في مس الذكر أنه قال ما أبالي أمسسته أم طرفة I think it's طرف not طرف طرف right. ما أبالي طرف the edge طرف means eye. So it doesn't say the eye of my nose, he's saying the end of my nose. طرف. Somebody is متطرف, right? Adil use that in Urdu, متطرف, like extremists. I don't know if that comes into Urdu. Right? So متطرف is somebody who's on the end of something, he's extremists. متطرف. Okay, so anyway, Sayyidina Ali, he said, I couldn't care less if you touch your private parts or touch the end of my nose, it's all the same. Right? قال محمد وهو قول أبي حنيفة وبه نأخذ. This is the verdict of Abu Hanifa, and we adhere to this. Right? Then he says, محمد قال محمد قال أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم أن ابن مسعود. So he says that Abdullah Mas'ud. So Sheikh Muhammad Hashir, did Ibrahim Nakhai actually study with Abdullah Mas'ud? He did not. He's a student of his students. So he studied with the students of Abdullah Mas'ud. He didn't study with Abdullah Mas'ud. So they were asked, why don't you quote your sources? He says, when I say that Abdullah Mas'ud said something, it means I'm quoting, that's what I heard from all of his students. So when he says, when Ibrahim Nakhai says that Abdullah Mas'ud said, he means I heard all of his students saying that he said that. He says, when I quote my source, it means just that person. Does that make sense? Like I'm saying, for example, I heard from my aunt, from my uncle, that in Pakistan they have a flower that's called this, as opposed to in Pakistan, they eat spicy food, right? So I quote my source to say that it's only from that person. And when I don't quote my source, I'm saying that it's widespread, right? So this is very important, the idea of isnad and irsal. It's not as simple as you can imagine, right? So here, when Ibrahim Nakhai doesn't quote his source to Abdullah Mas'ud, it means that it's actually stronger. And when he does quote his source, it means he only heard that from one of his students. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. So it's important to understand. And again, this reminds us, for those of you in the hadith, my hadith classes, is repeating for the millionth time the words of Sheikh Ahmad Snowbird. He said, "You need every narrator is a world. You need to know his world. How does he function? And how does he connect with other narrators?" So here, Ibrahim al-Nakhai from Abdullah Mas'ud is considered muttasil. It's not an issue. Right? It doesn't matter. It's not considered a gap in the chain. سئل عن الوضوء من مس ذكر فقال إن كان نجسا فاقطعه يعني أنه لا بأس به. Right. So Muhammad said, Abu Hanifa informed us from Hamad, from Ibrahim that Abdullah Mas'ud was asked about performing wudu from having touched the male private parts. He said, if it's so dirty, then cut it off! Exclamation mark. I is like If you think it's that so bad, if you ended up touching your private parts, you have to make wudu, then like you have a problem. Yeah. Um, there's no harm in it. It's like it's fine. He was like surprised basically. Like, what are you talking about? So again, the opposite of this we're going to find in the Muwatta of Imam Malik. Imam Malik, the Medinans are going to say the opposite. They're going to say, yeah, you have to make wudu from touching private parts. So he says, Muhammad said, أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم أن سعد بن أبي وقاص رضي الله عنه مر برجل يغسل ذكره فقال ما تصنع ويحك إن هذا لم يكتب عليك. Muhammad said, Abu Hanifa informed us from Hamad, from Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, that Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. So Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, I do not believe he narrates from Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, right? Passed by a man washing his private parts, and he was asked, "What are you doing? Woe to you! You don't have to do that." So one of the key things that the Sahaba gave to the Tabi'een or tried to correct with the Tabi'een is not to go to extremes, right? So I'm not sure exactly what he's doing. Oh, so here he says. قال محمد غسله أحب إلينا إذا بال وهو قول أبي حنيفة. So anyway, exactly what did he mean? Allahu alam. Muhammad said, washing it is preferable to us if one urinates. And that is the verdict of Imam Hanifa. I.e., you could just wipe. If you urinate, you could just wipe using toilet paper, using stones, using something else. But it's better to wash. Okay. باب ما لا ينجسه شيء الماء والأرض والجنب وغير ذلك. So it says that which nothing pollutes, water, the earth, and a person in need of ghusl because of sexual relations. محمد قال محمد قال أخبرنا أبو حنيفة قال حدثنا إبراهيم بن أبي الهيثم عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنه قال أربعة لا ينجسها شيء الجسد والثوب والماء والأرض. Right? The body, so we're going to mention, translate on the next page. So he says, Imam Muhammad narrates from al-Haytham ibn Abil Haytham, who narrated to us that Ibn Abbas said there are four things which nothing pollutes. You can't become filthy. The body, clothing, water, and the earth. So what does that really mean? قال محمد تفسير ذلك عندنا أن ذلك إذا أصابه القدر فغسل وذهب ذلك عنه فلم يحمل قدرا وإنما معناه في الماء إذا كان كثيرا أو جاريا لأنه لا يحمل خبثا. So Imam Muhammad said the explanation of this, according to us, is that when something dirty strikes something and one washes it, it departs from it, either filth, so it does not carry the filth. With respect to water, it only means that there is if there's a great deal of it, or it is flowing. So a large body of water or flowing water does not become filthy, right? So even the word earth, right? So what does it mean that the earth doesn't become filthy? So I don't know, I'm not a Hanafi, but I remember just being familiar with Hanafi fiqh, there was this issue of things falling down to the ground and it being overlooked, right? Everything gravitates towards the ground, right? So if everything that fell to the ground made the ground filthy, it'd be problematic. So anyway, Hanafis go and double check that was the issue with how does the earth, the earth slash the ground around you, how it becomes filthy, etc. Yeah, so it's not absolute. But anyway, but there are issues like that, the things that are overlooked. Okay. Okay. قال محمد وقال أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يخرج رأسه من المسجد. So this is obviously more sense. But this is the marasil of Ibrahim Nakhi are good, right? They're good. So there's a gap in the chain, one, two people in the chain, but it's considered something that is fairly reliable as opposed to all over the place. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يخرج رأسه من المسجد وهو معتكف فتغسله عائشة not تن رضي الله عنها وهي حائض. So Imam Muhammad says, Imam Abu Hanifa informed us from Hamad, from Ibrahim, and then it says here, yeah. So this hadith is well known, and it's connected in Bukhari and Nasa'i. It says that Prophet used to put his head outside of the mosque while he was in i'tikaf, and that Aisha would wash it while she was on a menstrual period. Oops, can't really see it properly here, can you? Right. And Aisha would wash it while she was in the menstrual period. So there's a fashion today, I don't know if it's coming to Sri Lanka yet, that women can be in the masjid on a period, right? Is everybody familiar with that new fatwa? Like, oh, everyone's distance from the deen, we should just let anybody go to the masjid, including a woman on her period.
Not yet. The other
Not
one
yet.
is more fashionable.
Okay.
Like
So
before
anyway,
we start talk, we inform the women who may be on their period to leave the masjid.
right. Anyway, so what happens then is, so somebody comes along and says there's no dalil, there's no proof that a woman, uh, if she's on her period, she can't be in the masjid. Okay, well, why didn't Aisha go in the masjid then? Why did the Prophet ﷺ stick his head out of the masjid so that she could wash it, his head? That doesn't make sense. So the only logical thing is that she's like, oh yeah, I can't be in the masjid on my period. Right? وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't sleep with your wives while you are in the masjid. That tells us that you can't be in janaba in the masjid, right? Don't sleep with your wife while you're in janaba. So if it's okay to be in the masjid in janaba, then you could sleep with your wife in the masjid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And then if you can't sleep with your wife, that means you can't be in janaba in the masjid. And if you can't be in janaba in the masjid, then you can't be on your period in the masjid. Same thing, isn't it? Right. So this hadith is not some kind of, it's not just here in this book. This hadith is in Bukhari. So there's a lot of things, ladies and gentlemen, that's like, it's fairly obvious. It's not like just the Hanafi school or just like, no, form of madhahib, we all agree a woman cannot be inside in a masjid, right? Can't be in the masjid, right? And it's like, subhanAllah, people are kind of questioning these things like this is kind of crazy. Like, why are we even questioning this? We all agree, the form of madhahib agree. It's pretty clear in the Quran, pretty clear in the hadith, you know? What's the proof against it? Ibn Hazmi says there was a lady, she used to clean the masjid during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. How is that a proof? That's different. So in the Shafi school, you can do that. So in the Shafi school, a non-Muslim can be in janaba in a mosque. Yeah. So a non-Muslim cannot make a ghusl, and so usually they're going to be in janaba, so they're going to have to. They can go to a masjid. They can do that. That's something else. What I'm talking about is, um, is that uh, so Ibn Hazm mentions that. He says there was a lady who used to clean the masjid during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. What's wrong with that proof?
She's not always in Janab. So.
Exactly. So maybe she didn't, maybe she was old and she doesn't have a period anymore. Maybe she wouldn't do that. So I say, for example, I used to eat meat in California. That doesn't mean I ate every single type of meat in California, does it? You know? Adil used to shake hands with people. That doesn't mean he used to shake hands with women. So you can't, it's not, you can't, it's like the fact that he used to shake hands with people doesn't mean that necessarily includes every single possibility of woman. So she used to clean the masjid, what, in every single situation? Even if she was on her period, no, not necessarily. قال محمد وبهذا نأخذ لا نرى به بأس وهو قول أبي حنيفة. We adhere to this, there's no harm in it, and it is the verdict of Imam Hanifa. Meaning what? Meaning the woman herself, she is not najis. That's the point. So is a woman herself, does her body become najis? No, the body does not become najis. Right? And then he says, next hadith is here. محمد said قال أخبرنا أبو حنيفة عن حماد عن إبراهيم أن رسول الله so again مرسل again أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بينما هو يمشي إذ عرض له حذيفة بن اليماني with a ya without the ya but no shadda on the ya رضي الله عنه فاعتمد عليه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فأخر حذيفة رضي الله عنه يده فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ما لك فقال يا رسول الله إني جنب قال إن المؤمن ليس بنجس. Right? So he said that Imam Muhammad narrates from Abu Hanifa, from Hamad, from Ibrahim, with a gap in the chain, Mursal, that the Messenger of Allah was walking and Hudhayfa ibn Yaman appeared before him. The Prophet ﷺ made to shake his hand or made to lean on him. But Hudhayfa held his hand back. The Prophet ﷺ said, "What is wrong with you?" He answered, Messenger of Allah, I am in need of ghusl from sexual relations. He said, a person who has iman is not impure. So your body does not become impure. It is your state that's impure. Right? قال محمد وبحديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نأخذ لا نرى بمصافحة الجنوب بأسا وهو قول أبي حنيفة رحمه الله. And Imam Muhammad said, we adhere to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So, what do you mean? What do you mean we adhere to? Everybody adheres to the hadith of the Prophet. What he means is this quote that is coming from the Prophet, we are taking its outward purport. We don't always follow the outward purport, the outward assumption, the most obvious understanding of every single hadith. Right? We see no harm in shaking hands with someone in need of ghusl because of sexual relations, and that is the verdict of Imam Hanifa. Shall I stop here? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك